Please be advised that this content is for mature audiences only. Paul Bernardo, born August 27, 1964, is a Canadian serial rapist and serial killer dubbed the Scarborough Rapist, the Schoolgirl Killer, and together with his former wife Karla Homolka, one of the Ken and Barbie killers. He is known for initially committing a series of rapes in Scarborough, Ontario, a suburb of Toronto, between 1987 and 1990, before committing 3 murders with Karla Homolka. Among these victims was Karla's younger sister, Tammy Homolka. This is their story. Hey everybody, Rosie here, and welcome to this episode of Cracklin' Rosie True Crime, where we will be covering the case of the Ken and Barbie killers. We will take a look at the case facts, we will look at the timeline, and then we will also take a listen together of some excerpts from Investigation Discovery on this case. So let's jump right in. Thank you for being here. So let's start back at this movie that was released in 2006, Karla. I saw this movie and I was horrified. Not knowing anything about the case at the time, I just kind of watched the movie and took it for what it's worth, looked a little bit into it. Now that I'm researching the case more, I recognize that this movie really sways towards the concept that Karla Homolka was more of a domestically abused wife. So I will put that out. But I did want to show you it was in 2006. It's called Karla with a K, and worth looking at so that you could make your own opinions about the movie. Of course, it is a movie, so it's not going to have everything on a factual basis, or it's going to be light on the facts, more on the drama, but something for you to look at. And then I also wanted to show, let's see, we got that. This docu-series, let's bring that up. This docu-series came out in December of 2021. It's a 4-part series, and you can view it on, I believe, Discovery Plus and Hulu, and there's a few others. So you could take a look at this series. It's called Ken and Barbie Killers, The Lost Murder Tapes. And that will make more sense once we get further into the information. Just wanted to give you those 2 sources for you to take a look at. So we're going to start with this article that I found that I thought was pretty interesting and well written, and it had the facts in a nice order. So it's called Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka Case, and the article is by Edward Butts. It was published online June 21st, 2016, and it was last edited October 31st, 2018. Of course, there'll be a link in the description of this video if you'd like to take a look at it in the future. The crimes of Paul Bernardo and his wife, Karla Homolka, were among the most horrifying and controversial in Canadian history. So they were a Canadian couple. This article contains sensitive material that may not be suitable for all audiences. And I know I already put that in the beginning of the video, but I will give you a strong trigger warning. If essay and abuse is not your thing, this may not be the video for you because the crimes are horrific. The crimes of serial rapist and murderer Paul Bernardo and his wife Karla Homolka, particularly the 1990s sex slayings of teenagers Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, were among the most horrifying and controversial in Canadian history. Scarborough Rapist. So prior to meeting Karla, Paul was already raping. And he was coined the Scarborough Rapist, of course, before they knew it was Bernardo. Around 1 a.m. on May 4th, 1987, a young woman was attacked and raped within minutes of getting off of a bus near her home in Scarborough, a suburb of Toronto. This was one of a series of up to 24 rapes or attempted rapes that took place over a 5-year period. The targets of the man called the Scarborough Rapists were teenage girls and young women. Most of the attacks happened outdoors, but in at least one instance, the perpetrator broke into the victim's home. The attacks were accompanied by beatings, intense verbal abuse, and dire threats to discourage victims from going to the police. So what he would do is he would take stuff from their bags, from their wallets, and say, I've got your identification, I've got this. If you report this, I'm going to come after you and kill you. On one occasion, a uniformed Toronto police officer staking out a bus shelter spotted a suspect hiding under a tree and pursued him on foot, but the suspect escaped. On 17 November 1988, Metropolitan Toronto Police formed a task force committed to the arrest of the Scarborough Rapist. Investigators did not get a significant lead until May 1990, when a victim provided them with a description of her attacker's face. Police created a computer composite portrait that was given wide circulation, including publication in newspapers. Among the 16,000 responses received over the following weeks were 3 from people who said the portrait resembled Paul Bernardo. Investigators twice questioned Bernardo, who lived in his parents' Scarborough home at the time. They were satisfied that he was not a likely suspect. But as a matter of routine, they took samples of his hair, blood, and saliva for DNA testing against specimens found on a rape victim's clothing. DNA testing was then new in Canada, and the Center of Forensic Sciences in Toronto had only one qualified scientist and one technician. The samples taken from dozens of men questioned in the Scarborough Rapist case were among 50,000 collected at that time by police investigating numerous cases across Ontario. So basically they sat for a while, and you'll hear some more of that in the excerpts on the film that I'm going to show. And also, if you do go and watch the 4-part series on the lost murder tapes, there's a lot of information. Death of Tammy Homolka. This is horrific. Tammy Homolka is the younger sister of Karla. By December 23, 1990, Bernardo, 26, was engaged to Karla Homolka, 20, and was living at her father's home in St. Catharines, Ontario. That evening, while Homolka's parents and younger sister Lori slept, Homolka and Bernardo drugged the younger sister, 15-year-old Tammy Lynn, so Bernardo could rape her. Homolka participated in and videotaped the sexual assault of her sister. Early in the morning of December 24th, Tammy, still unconscious, vomited and stopped breathing. Bernardo and Homolka dressed Tammy and carried her to her bedroom. They cleaned up the crime scene, hid the video cassette, and called 911 emergency number. An ambulance took Tammy to St. Catharines General Hospital, where she was pronounced dead. Niagara Regional Police questioned Bernardo and Homolka, particularly about an unusual burn mark on Tammy's face. So Karla worked in a veterinary office, and she got some drugs, and she was holding them against her sister's face, and you'll see some pictures of it. They're horrific, but you could see the burn mark on her face. So the police questioned it, but I mean, it was so huge, it should have been more than just questioning. I mean, it was, but they brought it, I heard on something I was researching with this case, that they contributed it to being maybe the acids from the vomiting. So, sorry, where were we? Oh, okay, before I started rambling. The burn had actually been caused by an anesthetic called halothane administered to Tammy on a cloth pressed over her face. And again, that was done by her sister, Karla. Doctors concluded that Tammy had choked to death on vomit after overindulging in alcohol. So it was Christmas Eve. They were celebrating as a family. And what they're really not telling you here that you'll learn later is that Tammy was a virgin. And at this point, she was 15 years old, and Bernardo wanted her. He wasn't happy that Karla wasn't a virgin when they met. She was 17 when they met, and she wasn't a virgin. And so he had this obsession with Tammy. Now, keep in mind, he's already raping. He's already outside raping. And when he met Karla, he told her that he was the Scarborough rapist. And she was like, oh, okay. And she was okay with it. Of course, she portrays that a little differently later, but all accounts show that she was not only okay with it, but she contributed, she initiated. There's a lot of controversy with this case that we'll talk about, and that is really where it lies. Later on, it's all about her being abused, being forced to do these things, but they videotaped their crimes, the torture and the sexual acts against these young women. And the tapes clearly show that Karla was an active participant, and if not, again, like I said before, initiated some of it. So, but we'll get more into that. Okay, so Leslie Mahaffey murder. On 1 February, it's Canadian, so they always put the day first. February 1st, 1991, Bernardo and Homolka moved into a bungalow in Port Dalhousie, Ontario. They were married in Niagara-on-the-Lake on June 29th. That same day, boaters and fishermen at Lake Gibson, south of St. Catharines, discovered concrete blocks that encase human arms, legs, feet, and a head. The next day, another man found a human torso floating in the water. The remains were identified as those of Leslie Mahaffey, 14, of Burlington, Ontario. Her parents had reported her missing on June 15th. While police undertook the investigation of the Mahaffey murder, Paul and Karla Bernardo were honeymooning in Hawaii. Police searching for clues to Mahaffey's killer were unaware of evidence that would connect the crime to the Scarborough rapists. Meanwhile, Tammy Homolka's death wasn't under criminal investigation at all. Remember, they called it an accident. She choked on her own vomit after indulging on alcohol, with a big burn mark over her face, on her mouth and her cheek. Almost a year later, in April 1992, Niagara Regional Police sought help from the American Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. An FBI group of criminal profiling experts produced a psychological portrait of the murderer as a sexual predator who would probably kill again. Kristen French, this is the other. So there were 3 total. Tammy, her sister, Mahaffey, and French. Kristen French murder. On April 30th, 1992, a female body was found in a ditch along a rural road in the north end of Burlington. The face was battered and the hair had been shaved from the head, but an old injury, the missing tip of the left pinky finger, immediately told investigators that the corpse was that of Kristen French, 15, of St. Catharines. French's parents had reported her missing on April 16th. A shoe identified as hers was found in the parking lot of Grace Lutheran Church, which she passed by every day going to and from school. Then a witness reported seeing a scuffle in that parking lot on the afternoon of the 16th. It had appeared to the witness that 2 people were forcing a girl into a car she described as a cream-colored Chevrolet Camaro. We learned later that it wasn't a Chevy Camaro, but that was what the witness thought she saw. Police searched the parking lot and found a torn fragment of a map of Scarborough and a lock of brown hair. They began an exhaustive check of cream-colored Camaros, following what turned out to be a mistaken lead. Bernardo's car was a gold-colored Nissan. Common killer. Acting on a tip that Bernardo had a penchant for violence and aggressive sex, police interviewed him on May 12th and once again dismissed him as a prime suspect in what were now being called the two Schoolgirl murders of southern Ontario. Mahaffey's remains were exhumed and medical examiners found bruises on the back that had similarities to the blunt force injuries of Kristen French's body. For the first time, police connected the two murders. Niagara Regional Police, working with the Halton Regional Police, established a special task force to conduct the investigation into the two crimes. On July 21st, a reenactment of French's abduction was shown on TV. It generated thousands of tips, but no substantial leads. On January 6, 1993, Karla Homolka was admitted to St. Catherine's General Hospital after Bernardo beat her viciously with a flashlight. He was arrested and charged with assault with a weapon and then released on bail. Homolka never returned to the couple's house in Port Dalhousie. A month later, the Center of Forensic Sciences finally matched Bernardo's DNA with that of the Scarborough rapist. Police put Bernardo under surveillance and tapped his phone. Homolka's plea bargain. Homolka was initially uncooperative with police. After consulting with her lawyer, she said she would testify against Bernardo on the condition of being granted immunity from prosecution. The Attorney General for Ontario would not agree to immunity, but was willing to consider a reduced sentence. On February 17th, Bernardo was arrested for the murders of Mahaffey and French and the Scarborough rapes. Police subjected Homolka to 4 days of interrogation. She blamed Bernardo for her sister's death. She described how Bernardo had kidnapped Mahaffey from the yard of the girl's home and how she and Bernardo had lured French to their car in the parking lot. She said both girls were used as sex slaves before Bernardo strangled them to death. French had been made to watch a television news broadcast of her father's emotional plea for her safe return. Homolka claimed Bernardo had boasted to her of raping at least 30 women. Homolka described herself as a battered wife who was forced to participate in Bernardo's crimes and who lived in terror of him. A search of their house turned up a list of the Scarborough tapes, books of a deviant sexual nature, a hunting knife, handcuffs, and a videotape of Homolka and Bernardo engaged in sexual activity with two unidentified young women. Homolka was clearly a willing participant in both encounters. She admitted to police that one of the girls had been drugged and was later unaware that she had been raped. So let's just stop there because I just threw so much information at you, and if you're not familiar with the case, let's just do a light recap. Coffee. So, Bernardo's raping. He meets Homolka. She's 17, I believe he's 23. He's already a serial rapist. She finds out it works for her. Sick. They start luring people together. What happens is he never did murder any of his victims. He just threatened them. He raped them, a lot of them from behind, and some of them couldn't identify him because he would grab them outdoors, rape them from behind, and then, give them a threat and take off. Some of them didn't even see him. But as he got more persistent with the rapes and for lack of a better way of saying it, but more experienced, he dove into it more. He wanted to hold them hostage. He wanted to scare them. He wanted to do those kind of things. And when he met Karla and her helping him and being into it, they started videotaping. She participated in the sex acts, in the restraining, in the physical and verbal abuse. She was a part of it. The tapes show this. What ends up happening is, after she got her butt beat and went to the cops, at that point, now she wanted to turn the tables and put the blame all on him. And she offered up the police information that they can use against Bernardo on the French and Mahaffey murders, where they really didn't have anything substantial. Even though they had the DNA from the Scarborough rapes, they didn't have enough on the murders other than Homolka's testimony against him. So she worked a deal with them, and what they wouldn't grant her full immunity, but they were willing, if she pled guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter, they would give her 10 years, and that was it. Later, when they found the tapes and realized that they were responsible for the death of her sister Tammy, and that she was a participant, she was given an additional 2 years. And ultimately, Karla served 12 years. She got out. She married her lawyer's brother or something like that, had children. She moved to, I think, Montreal for a while, and then they caught up with her there, and she was having problems and took off. And the last that I read, she's living her life with her, having children and living in the Caribbean. She's changed her identity, and we'll look, if y'all are interested in this case, I might do another video with some footage of her, more current footage of the media catching up with her. But she doesn't want to talk, that sort of thing, and it's crazy. So I did describe the 12-year sentence to you. Bernardo life. He was denied review, and he's in prison for life. So, which they really both should be. 12 years, 10 years, and then the value of her sister's life added another 2 years to her sentence. That's infuriating. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and skip over this, because what we're going to, some of it will be a little repetitive when I go through the timeline, and then we are going to see a lot of this and you will hear a lot of it over, but there's so much detail in this despicable case that you almost have to hear it over and over. So next we're going to go over the timeline. I kind of summarized these next few paragraphs here for you. They were just going to cover the deal, and the Canadians call it the deal with the devil, because they cannot believe what Homolka got out of it. 12 years, crazy. But Bernardo was declared as a dangerous offender, so they weren't going to consider him for parole or anything like that. So he's a lifer. Let's move on to the timeline. So the creator of this Weebly site with the timeline did a nice job with it. I will put it in the description for you so that you can take a look, and of course to give them credit. So timeline of key events of the Bernardo Homolka case. May 1987, a young woman is raped in Scarborough, Ontario. The first in a chain of rapes committed by the person the media says is the Scarborough rapist. Paul Bernardo would later admit to sexual assaults of at least 14 of these cases. Bernardo faces 53 charges related to the rape and murder of young women. Now, you'll hear different things on different sources, and from what I was able to make out with research, it really sounded like he had a couple dozen rapes or attempted rapes. Okay, October 17, 1987. Paul Bernardo, who was 23 years old, meets Karla Homolka age 17, at a hotel restaurant in Scarborough, Ontario. So he meets her already committing rapes. We already discussed that. She was just a 17-year-old. He was, I guess, what people consider good looking. He was charming. He treated her real well, that sort of thing. I just want to make note here. I don't know if you can really see, but this first girl is Tammy, and that's Karla Homolka's sister, who they murdered, and Mahaffey and French. And you saw the clip that I included in the beginning of the video, so I just want to mention them again. So often we mention the offenders and not enough on the victims, and we will include some of that in the next video, because there were three beautiful young girls with their whole lives ahead of them, and it was taken from them tragically. Okay, on December 24th, 1989, Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka are engaged. 1990, Bernardo loses his job. He tries to make money by smuggling cigarettes. July 1990, Paul Bernardo served Karla Homolka's sister, Tammy, spaghetti filled with volumes stolen from Karla's work. Bernardo raped Tammy for about a minute before she woke up. So it's saying he put the drugs in. I've also heard that Karla put the drugs in. She worked at a vet's office and she obtained sedatives that way. And so I've heard it both ways. Karla blames him, he blames her. But either way, they did it. And this abuse was of a sexual nature, but it was short. And if you listen to Deadbug's video, he'll tell you. I know Deadbug's not for everybody, but I do love his channel. And if he is for you, he does a great about 30-minute recap on this case. In his words, he gave her the finger. November 20th, 1990. Bernardo is questioned about the Scarborough rapes and provides the Metro Toronto Police with hair, blood, saliva samples. December 23rd, 1990. After a family Christmas party, Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka drugged Tammy Homolka with animal tranquilizers that Karla stole from her work. Bernardo and Karla rape Tammy while she is unconscious. Tammy later chokes on her own vomit and dies. Bernardo tells police that he tried to save her but failed. Her death is ruled an accident, and we talked a little bit about that. January 1991. Bernardo picks up a young female hitchhiker and brings her back to Homolka's home. He rapes her in Karla's bedroom. He drops her off in an alley. February 1, 1991, Bernardo and Homolka rent a house in St. Catharines. So I had read that Homolka's parents had asked them to move out, specifically Paul Bernardo, because they wanted to mourn the death of their daughter, the younger daughter, Tammy, properly. And of course, at this time, they didn't know that it was because of them. June 14th, 1991, Bernardo kidnaps 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey from outside her home in Burlington, Ontario. With Homolka, he rapes and murders her. June 29th, 1991, Bernardo and Homolka are married. Mahaffey's remains are found in concrete in Lake Gibson near St. Catharines, Ontario. You'll see in the video clip that we watch from next that there were, I think, a father and son, or you'll see it in the video. They were sitting by the lake, and they were sitting on a concrete block, and one of them saw the hand. So they not only murdered her, but they butchered her up, encased her body in concrete, and threw her in Lake Gibson. Animals. April 16th, 1992, Bernardo, with the help of Homolka, kidnaps Kristen French from a church parking lot on her way home from school in Burlington, Ontario. After raping and torturing her for days, it's 3 days, but here it just says days, they kill her and leave her body naked in a ditch with her hair cut off. So just jumping into that a little bit. Bernardo claims he never wanted to murder any of them. That was Karla's thing. She shaved the hair. Like, it's said that she was jealous of this girl. And she ended up shaving her head before discarding her body. April 30th, 1992, French's body is found in a ditch north of Burlington, Ontario. December 1992, the Center of Forensic Sciences begin DNA testing of the samples Bernardo provided in 1990. So he had provided samples 2 years prior. January 1993, Bernardo beats Homolka with a flashlight, leaving her with 2 black eyes. Picture below, and I see if you could see that. I'm moving the wrong way. Homolka files charges against Paul Bernardo. So this is kind of where it gets hot now. February 17, 1993, Bernardo is arrested. Later find that officers that were in charge violated Bernardo's Charter of Rights by not allowing him to call a lawyer, even with his repeated requests, making this part of the investigation inadmissible as evidence. Little technicalities. February 19, 1993, search warrant begins in Bernardo's home in St. Catharines. This was a 71-day search. Police failed to find videotapes containing the recordings of the rapes of Mahaffey, French, Tammy, and at least one other girl that they were calling Jane Doe. But they didn't find, Jane Doe didn't end up dead. She was a rape victim. May 6, 1993, Ken Murray, Bernardo's lawyer, gains entrance to Bernardo's home. Murray gets the videotapes from a ceiling light fixture in his upstairs bathroom. He would keep the videotapes in his possession for 16 months. I need to fact check that because I heard on another one it was 10 months or something like that. But either way, even if it is 10 months or almost a year, his lawyer did not put those forward. He was holding on to the videotaped evidence. And you'll hear also when we listen together to the video coverage a little bit more on that. May 1993, the plea agreement between Crown prosecutors and Homolka's lawyers are finalized. Sorry, I can't see. June 28th, 1993, Homolka's trial begins. July 1993, Homolka pleads guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter and receives a 12-year jail sentence. Her pleas and the statement of facts agreed to by the lawyer and the Crown are both covered by a publication ban ordered by the judge to ensure a fair trial for Bernardo. So the people went crazy when they covered up the details of the deal. September 1994, Ken Murray quits as Bernardo's lawyer, hands Bernardo's videotapes over to his successor, John Rosen. Rosen turns the videos over to police later in the month. So he did turn them over right away. He turned over the evidence while Murray was holding on to them. May 18, 1995, Bernardo's trial begins. June 29, 1995, Homolka testifies against Bernardo. September 1, 1995, Bernardo is found guilty of all counts against him, including 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing French and Mahaffey. September 15, 1995, Bernardo is sentenced for life in prison without possibility of parole for 25 years. November 1995, Bernardo is declared a dangerous offender, meaning he will spend the rest of his life in jail. April 1996, an Ontario court judge rules that videotapes showing the rape and torture of Bernardo's victims must be destroyed when they are not needed for legal purposes, and they were destroyed. July 1996, a 6-month inquiry into the police investigation shows that mistakes were made by police departments and individual police. Conclude that some of Bernardo's crimes could have been prevented if the DNA samples were processed quicker, in 2 years. But I also, in researching it, there was like one forensic scientist there, and for whatever reason, they didn't believe, because he was quick to give up the DNA samples when initially taken in, they didn't suspect him. January 97, Ken Murray is charged with obstruction of justice and possession of child pornography for failing to turn over the Bernardo tapes. Summer 1997, Homolka is transferred to Joliet Institution in Quebec when the Kingston Prison for Women is closed. September 21, 2000, the Supreme Court of Canada denies Bernardo's leave to appeal his murder convictions. December 2001, the 6 videotapes depicting the rape and torture of Bernardo and Homolka's victims are destroyed. So at that point, now they realize that it was done legally. He's not getting out of jail, and they were ordered to destroy those videotapes. And the families were very, very thankful. They wanted them destroyed from the get-go, and that's very understandable. December 16, 2004, the National Parole Board rules that Homolka must stay in prison for her full term, ending July 5th, 2005, which again was 12 years, 10 for the 2, and then 2 additional when they viewed the videotapes. It was after the fact that that she was involved in Tammy's homicide. April 12, 2005, Ontario Attorney General Mike O'Brien says Homolka will not be charged with killing her sister when she is released from prison in July. July 4, 2005, Karla Homolka is released from prison after her 12-year sentence. She gets out of the St. Anne de Plains prison, where she had been transferred about a month before her release. Reporters wait outside the prison for days to catch a glimpse of her leaving. A prison official and the lawyer for the victims' families confirm the release. February 21, 2006, Bernardo's lawyer reveals that Bernardo confessed in October 2005 to at least 10 more sexual assaults. Serial rapist. June 7, 2007, Bernardo meets with police and Crown attorneys to discuss the 1990 disappearance and presumed killing of Elizabeth Bain. June 10, 2008, a judge rules that Bernardo's case can be broadcasted. Bernardo's police interview regarding the case can be published on television and the web. And we do have that available if you all are interested. It won't be on this vid, but if you're interested in me linking it into the playlist, I will. We could just watch it together and have an open chat. All right. June 16, 2010, it looks like that's where this ends. Public Safety Minister Vic Tao said an agreement has been reached between all federal parties to pass a bill that would prevent offenders like Karla Homolka from applying for a pardon. So that's the basic timeline. We're going to get a lot more out of the vid that we're getting ready to watch. The people, the victims' families, they were so appalled at the deal with the devil. They could not believe that 12 years is what she served, but she was needed to testify against Bernardo. So it is what it is, and that's what it is. And, Karla got out after 12 years and living her life. As I mentioned before, she married her attorney's brother. I think she ended up having 3 kids. I don't think they stayed together, but she lives her life, and there is some footage. I'll include it if we decide that as a community we want to see interrogation or something like that for Bernardo, we can stick some of the videos that are available. And if not, you could do a search on the tubes, but you can see a more current video of Karla with the press kind of getting at her. And she did an interview or two, a couple of interviews. I didn't see them all, but if you're interested in that, it is available, and I could include it. You know, y'all let me know in the chat or comments. All right. So I think we are going to move on to the video. And during the video, I will be in chat with you, and we will chat it up. We will discuss. We will help each other understand and ask questions, answer questions, all that stuff together. So let me get this off. And we will get the video rolling. Give me a moment.
This appears to be an innocent home video of a happy couple, Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. But in an adjoining room is 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey. Before the night is out, she'll be brutally murdered and thrown into a lake. Her body is discovered 1 year later. Paul stands trial for her murder and that of another teenager, Kristen French.
We love you, Kristen, and we are constantly in our thoughts and our prayers.
But Karla is not on trial with him.
Nobody died before Karla got involved.
But was justice really served? This is the incredible case of the Ken and Barbie killers. Karla Homolka grows up in a normal, stable, and happy family in Ontario, Canada. The eldest child of 3, she's pretty, smart, and popular at school. At the age of 17, she falls in love with 22-year-old Paul Bernardo. He's a hard-working junior accountant with a bright future. Bernardo proposes to Homolka on Christmas Eve, 1989. In the summer of 1991, 21-year-old Homolka marries 26-year-old Bernardo in a fairy tale wedding in historic Niagara-on-the-Lake. No expense is spared. Homolka and Bernardo appear to be the perfect couple. Until January 4th, 1993, when Karla Homolka walks into her local police station in St. Catharines, Ontario, with 2 black eyes. The next day, she files charges against her husband for domestic assault. Police in Toronto hear of the charges. They're intrigued because since mid-1987, there have been 14 rapes or attempted rapes 70 miles away in Scarborough, Toronto. Bernardo was once interviewed by police because his face matches a sketch of the suspect, but fails to rouse further suspicion and is eliminated from their investigation. Fueled by news of the assault charge, police decide Paul Bernardo is worth a closer look. Homolka is scared because she's hiding a terrible secret.
I think that with the police coming around to investigate her and her relationship with Bernardo, she was afraid that they might stumble on something.
2 teenage girls have gone missing within the last year. One is 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey. The other is 15-year-old Kristen French.
Kristen, if you can hear or read this, you want to know that we are thinking of you and that everything can be done is being done. And we'll get you back and we'll quit.
But the 2 girls are found dead. Kristen's body in a ditch. 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey's in a lake. Homolka's secret is that she knows what happened to them, and it involved her and her husband. Homolka's fear is that if her husband is implicated in their killing, then she too can be charged with aiding and abetting him. It's a crime that could carry a life sentence. So she calls an attorney in her hometown of St. Catharines for help.
He decided to trade the information that she had on two very high-profile homicides for some degree of immunity, if not total immunity.
Homolka tells her attorney that Bernardo has murdered the girls, and he forced her to help him. To avoid her facing life in prison for murder, her attorney proposes a plea bargain.
She would plead guilty to manslaughter in relation to each of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French for 5 years apiece, total 10 years. And on the condition that she would tell 110% of the truth to the police and would testify and so on and so forth.
Homolka agrees to tell the police everything and promises to give evidence against her husband. The police then search their home but find nothing. So, based solely on her confession, Paul Bernardo is arrested and charged with kidnapping, rape, and murder of 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey and 15-year-old Kristen French. On July 6, 1993, Homolka is convicted of 2 counts of manslaughter and sentenced to just 10 years in prison, as had been agreed. The press are banned from reporting the plea bargain hearing. Bernardo is held in jail, awaiting trial for murder. He waits 2 years. Meanwhile, in September 1994, John Rosen becomes Bernardo's defense attorney. But as he begins to study the case, he makes an alarming discovery.
I was very upset. I was so upset I excused myself. I went into the bathroom, got myself together, and I said, okay, that's the way it is, that's the way it is.
In the case against Paul Bernardo, his defense team discovers shocking videotapes of him and his wife Karla torturing their teenage victims. The tapes leave no doubt that Bernardo, at the very least, is a savage rapist.
Could I get Mr. Bernardo off completely? Not in light of those tapes. From the tapes, the jury would quickly conclude that he was one of the abductors, that he unlawfully confined, that he sexually assaulted each of the girls.
So Rosen prepares an unusual defense. He'll argue that although Bernardo may have done terrible things, the girls were only murdered because of Homolka.
Nobody died before Karla got involved. Karla was involved, Leslie died, then Kristen, okay?
If he can convince the jury that it was Homolka who was behind the murders, he'll tell them they must reduce the first-degree murder charge against Bernardo.
And there is a possibility that he could be found guilty of second-degree or manslaughter. So while I was not in a position to work towards a complete acquittal, I was in a position to try and get a lesser charge at the end of the day, or lesser conviction.
On May 18, 1995, the trial of Paul Bernardo begins here at the Toronto Superior Courthouse. The families of his 2 victims, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey and 15-year-old Kristen French, attend court every day.
Paul Bernardo has been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of unlawful confinement, 2 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of aggravated sexual assault, and 1 count of causing an indignity to a human body.
To each of the 9 charges, Bernardo stands and replies in a loud, clear voice, "Not guilty." Everything would now depend on whether John Rosen could prove Homolka instigated the murders.
I had to actually demonstrate that for the jury as to how unreliable she was, and ultimately put her in a position where I could, with good authority, put to her that she's the actual killer.
Eric Broadhurst would be one of the 12 members of the jury Rosen would have to convince. He vividly remembers the first time he saw Paul Bernardo in the courtroom.
He was filled with confidence, tall, blonde-haired, good-looking, physically fit, blue-piercing eyes, and very aloof. I think from day one, he figured he was going to get out of this.
Key to the trial will be the interpretation of the content of the videotapes. The prosecution will argue that the tapes show Bernardo is the killer, but the defense believes their confidence is misplaced.
They began on the presumption that he was so evil and so bad that it was a slam dunk. And it wasn't.
The prosecution opens their case against Bernardo by playing the tapes, frame by frame, in open court. At first, it seems the videos are nothing more than homemade pornographic movies, the stars of which are Bernardo and Homolka. As the tapes play on, other characters appear who are restrained, clearly in pain and suffering, and forced to endure humiliating abuse. The victims are easily identifiable as 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey and 15-year-old Kristen French. While their deaths are not on the tapes, brutal violence is, including the sexual assaults. It proves more than the victims' families could bear. Analysis of the tapes takes weeks. The first person to be questioned about their content is Karla Homolka. She's the prosecution's witness, so they begin by attempting to portray her as just another one of Bernardo's victims. A victim who is forced into watching rape and murder by her husband.
But you know what? She did cry a number of times, but she was very composed, and she handled herself extremely well.
John Rosen's task is to undermine her claims in his cross-examination.
I had to break her down in terms of credibility. I had to demonstrate that she was no victim, that she was a perpetrator.
What follows is a classic courtroom confrontation. Rosen's aim is to remind the court who the real victims are.
I said, here's poor Kristen, dead. Cleaned, washed, and dead. Right. I said, you're no victim.
After 9 days on the witness stand in her husband Paul Bernardo's murder trial, Karla Homolka's testimony comes to an end. Bernardo's attorney now gives the court his account of what really happened to Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French in 1991. The defense claims Bernardo only intends to kidnap and rape, and the idea of murder is always Homolka's. The first victim, Leslie Mahaffey, is abducted, and then crucially, Rosen argues, she's blindfolded by Bernardo before being raped.
He just came across her and decided on a spur of a moment to kidnap her and use her as a sexual toy. And he blindfolded her so she wouldn't see him, which again lends credence to the fact that he intended to let her go.
Rosen claims everything changes when Homolka removes the blindfold, something she denies doing. But now Leslie can identify her abusers. They'll have to kill her. After 24 hours of rape and abuse, Mahaffey is strangled, Rosen claims, by Homolka. Again, something she denies. And according to Rosen, Karla Homolka takes charge of destroying any evidence.
There was a decision to dispose of the body by sawing her up into pieces. Karla was there with the tarp, and Karla scrubbed that basement floor to make sure there wasn't one shred of Leslie Mahaffey in that house, and the police never found anything.
Homolka denies this allegation too. Rosen moves on to say how he believes their second victim, Kristen French, is killed. Homolka and Bernardo stalk her and abduct her as she walks home from school. They take her back to their house and hold her captive.
Kristen French was this naive young girl in a private Catholic school who'd been scooped off the street by both of them, and that was horrible enough.
Homolka videotapes Bernardo raping Kristen before joining in the rape and abuse herself.
And then to be subjected to gross indignities during the course of the sexual assault. And, but a very, very, very strong and feisty little girl.
Despite putting up a determined fight, Kristen French is savagely abused over the course of 3 days and then suffocated. And yet again, Rosen argues that it's Homolka who takes charge of destroying the evidence. Though yet again, she denies it.
She had been showered and washed and all the forensic evidence gone. And that was all Karla. Karla wanted to make sure they didn't get caught. She made sure that things were cleaned up and so forth. And so from that view of the evidence, I took the position he wasn't the killer.
Throughout the trial, Homolka denies being a willing accomplice, insisting she too was a victim. After 18 weeks of argument, everything depends on whose account the jury believes, Homolka's or Bernardo's. On August 31st, the jury is sent out of the court to consider their verdict.
When we were dismissed to reach a verdict, it took us 1.5 days, the second day, and we had reached a verdict unanimously, the 12 of us, on all 9 charges against Paul Bernardo. It was unanimous, and he was guilty on each count.
2 weeks later, 31-year-old Paul Bernardo is sentenced to 25 years in prison. Though in Canada, he's considered a dangerous offender, which means it's unlikely he'll ever be released. But Bernardo's sentence is not the end of the story. Only after the trial is finished, as the media blackout is lifted, does the press and public begin to learn about Homolka's plea bargain. One chilling story emerges that casts doubt on Homolka's claim that she is just another of Bernardo's victims. Just after Paul Bernardo's sentencing, a disturbing story involving him and Karla Homolka is revealed. On Christmas Eve 1990, 6 months before Karla and Paul marry, her sister Tammy, aged 14, is found dead, having choked on her own vomit. At the time, it's thought it's just a tragic accident. But during her secret plea bargain hearing, Karla Homolka reveals that her death is anything but.
She was also a participant in the death of her sister, Tammy Homolka. Not in circumstances that amounted to murder, but circumstances that amounted to manslaughter, still a homicide, an unlawful killing.
14-year-old Tammy Homolka develops a schoolgirl crush on her sister's fiancé, but she has no idea that Karla has promised him her virginity. So that night, Karla plies Tammy with champagne. Tammy soon becomes incapacitated. And while Homolka keeps her drugged on the anesthetic halothane, Bernardo rapes her throughout the night. They hadn't planned on killing her, but the drunken, defenseless teenager chokes on her own vomit. Homolka tries to revive her, but fails. So the two of them clean up the mess and make it look like an accident. Karla reveals her part in the manslaughter of her sister only after the plea bargain is agreed. But rather than cancel the deal, Canadian authorities accept Homolka's confession and extend her sentence by just 2 years. None of this information is made available to the court at Bernardo's trial.
I don't fault them for making the deal. I know other people do. But at the time that the deal was made, they had no evidence against either of them. They didn't even know that they were involved.
Shortly after the trial, Homolka and Bernardo's house is demolished before a crowd of grateful neighbors and an emotional Debbie Mahaffey, the mother of their victim, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey.
When this house comes down, it comes down for all victims in my mind, everywhere. That's why I wouldn't mind throwing a brick and seeing if I couldn't hit that top window.
When Karla Homolka is released from prison on July 5th, 2005, after serving her 12 years, she doesn't return to her hometown, but is given a new identity and moves over 300 miles away to the city of Montreal. She lives anonymously until she's eventually tracked down.
Hi. Karla, can I ask you a question? Do you have anything to say to us? A lot of people in your neighborhood don't like the fact that you're living here. Anything to say about that? How's your last year been in Montreal?
Homolka later leaves Montreal and now lives on the Dutch Antilles Islands in the Caribbean. Her ex-husband, Paul Bernardo, is likely to die in prison. But for some involved in the case, one question remains. Did Homolka get off too lightly?
She served the full, complete 12 years and is now free as a bird and is married and has a child, but she got away with it.